I'm the person nobody wants to see walking toward their desk. I'm the chief ethics and compliance officer at a Series B tech startup outside Boston, which basically means I'm the designated adult in a daycare center run by toddlers in Patagonia vests. My job is to tell 20-something millionaires that, no, you cannot expense a trip to Chalum as team building if the only team member you took was your mistress. I don't smoke. I don't drink before 6 p.m., and I treat the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, like scripture. But nothing prepared me for Nate. Nate was the founder's son. Robert, the founder, was a visionary in the way that cult leaders are visionaries, charismatic, delusional, and completely untethered from reality. He brought Nate on as the VP of Strategic Vision, a title that implies he does nothing but burn oxygen and cash. Nate was 26, had a degree in entrepreneurial leadership from a college that accepts checks instead of SAT scores, and wore loafers without socks in February. It started on a Tuesday. I was deep in the weeds of an internal audit regarding a vendor that didn't seem to exist outside of a PO box in the Cayman Islands when my phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Nate R. wants to connect. Harmless, right? Except the message attached wasn't looking forward to working together. Was, hey E-Money, saw you in the break room. You got that strict librarian vibe that drives me crazy. Let's grab a drink and discuss compliance. He included the winky face. He actually included the winky face. I stared at the screen. I'm 45 years old. I have a mortgage, 2 degrees, and a patience reserve that was running on fumes. This kid was wearing a lanyard I authorized. My finger hovered over the ignore button. I didn't just ignore it. I blocked him. I don't mix business with pleasure. And I certainly don't mix my career with a trust fund baby who thinks sexual harassment is just assertive flirting. Quick side note before I tell you how this exploded. I'm dropping this whole saga here because my NDA has more holes in it than Nate's logic. If you want to see how a middle-aged woman dismantled a tech bro empire with a ballpoint pen, hit upvote and subscribe button. Seriously, it fuels my caffeine addiction and lets me know you're listening. Okay, back to the disaster. The next morning was the all-hands meeting. The office was one of those industrial chic nightmares: exposed brick, exposed ductwork, and exposed insecurities. We were gathered in the collaboration pit, sitting on bean bags that cost more than my first car. Robert was droning on about disrupting the paradigm, a phrase he used whenever we missed revenue targets. Nate was leaning against the wall, vaping something that smelled like cotton candy and entitlement. We need total synergy, Robert announced, looking around the room with manic intensity. We are a family, we connect, we share. Right, Nate? Nate pushed off the wall, his eyes locking onto me. He smirked. It was the smirk of a man who has never been told no without a lawyer present. Funny you say that, Dad, Nate said, his voice loud enough to cut through the hum of the HVAC. Some people here aren't really into the family vibe. I tried to reach out to Erin yesterday. You know, bridge the gap between strategy and compliance. She blocked me. The room went silent. 30 heads turned toward me. The silence wasn't awkward, it was terrified. In a startup, you don't cross the bloodline. Is that true, Erin? Robert asked. His tone wasn't curious, it was accusatory. I didn't look up from my iPad. I keep my social media for professional contacts only, Robert. And my LinkedIn is for peers, not internal social calls. It's about culture, Erin, Nate pressed, walking into the center of the circle. He looked like a shark in a slime-covered suit. If you can't connect with leadership, how can you trust leadership, it feels? Insubordinate. He let the word hang there. Insubordinate. In the corporate world, that's a loaded gun. I trust data, Nate, I said, finally meeting his eyes. Mine were cold, his were glassy. And the data suggests that we should focus on the Series C funding round closing next week, rather than my LinkedIn connections. Maybe your lack of connection is why you're so stiff, Nate laughed. A few sycophants giggled nervously. Maybe you need to loosen up. Get with the program. Robert didn't correct him. He didn't stop him. He just watched me, disappointment etching lines into his face. I realized then that this wasn't about a friend request. This was a test of loyalty to the crown, and I had just committed treason by having boundaries. I went back to my desk, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I pulled up the Series C due diligence folder. I checked the signatory requirements. I knew they were going to come for me, but I also knew something they didn't. They thought I was just a barrier to their fun. They didn't realize I was the load-bearing wall holding up their entire glass house. I opened a fresh email draft. Subject, documentation of interaction N. Roberts. If they wanted a war, I'd bring the ammunition. But I had no idea that by Friday, I wouldn't just be fighting for my job. I'd be fighting to stay out of prison for a crime I didn't commit. Friday arrived with the grim inevitability of a tax audit. The air in the office was thin, charged with static and gossip. I could feel eyes on my back as I walked to the break room for my third coffee. Conversations died when I entered and resurrected the second the door swung shut behind me. I wasn't just the ethics officer anymore, I was a dead woman walking. At 2 p.m., the calendar invite appeared. Quick sync Robert's office. No agenda. No HR representative listed. Just me, the king, and the prince. I walked into Robert's office. It was a glass fishbowl overlooking the Charles River, designed to intimidate. Robert sat behind a desk made of reclaimed wood that probably cost more than the GDP of a small island nation. Nate was sitting on the corner of the desk, swinging his legs, scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up. "Sit down, Aaron," Robert said. He didn't offer me water. I sat. I kept my posture perfect, spine straight, hands folded in my lap. I was wearing my armor, a navy blazer and a face that gave away absolutely nothing. "We've been doing some thinking," Robert started, leaning back and clasping his hands behind his head. "About the trajectory of Nebula Tech. About the energy we need to get to the next level." "Energy," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yeah, energy," Nate chimed in, finally looking up. His eyes were bloodshot. "Vibe, flow. You're a blocker, Aaron. You're always talking about regulations and risk. Kills the momentum." "My job is risk mitigation, Nate," I said calmly. "It's not supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be legal." "See," Robert pointed a finger at me like I'd just confessed to murder. "That attitude, it's toxic. We're disruptors, Aaron. We move fast and break things. You're the glue that's drying too hard. You're stiff." And that display on Wednesday? Refusing to connect with a senior executive. It showed a fundamental lack of trust. I refused a sexual proposition sent via a professional platform. I corrected him. I kept my voice level, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nate laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Wow, you're delusional. It was a joke, Aaron. God, you're hysterical. This is exactly what we mean. You're not a culture fit." Robert slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. "We're terminating your contract, effective immediately. For cause. Subordination and creating a hostile work environment." For cause, that meant no severance, no unemployment. They were stripping me bare. However, Robert continued, his voice taking on an oily sheen. "Because we value your past contributions, we're willing to offer a transition package. 3 months' pay. All you have to do is sign this." He tapped a document on top of the pile. A standard NDA, or so it looked. I glanced at the text upside down. It was draconian. It barred me from speaking to investors, employees, or the press. It essentially erased my existence at the company. "I'm not signing anything without my lawyer reviewing it," I said, standing up. "Take it or leave it," Nate sneered. "Walk out that door without signing and you get zero. And we'll make sure every tech company in Boston knows you're difficult." I looked at Robert. He was weak, led by the nose by his idiot son. I looked at Nate. He was gloating, thinking he had won. And then it hit me. The date. Today was October 14th. The Series C funding round, a $50 million injection led by the notoriously strict Archer Capital, was scheduled to close on October 20th. Next Thursday. I knew the term sheet for Archer Capital better than I knew my own medical history. I had drafted the compliance section myself. Clause 14B, conditions precedent to closing. It stated in bold, an ambiguous font, that the company must have a designated chief ethics and compliance officer in place, and that specific officer must sign the certificate of good standing and ethical compliance 48 hours prior to the wire transfer. And not just any officer. The term sheet explicitly named me. Aaron S., current CICO. If they fired me for cause today, they would be in breach of the term sheet by Monday. If they tried to replace me, they'd have to notify Archer Capital, triggering a reopening of due diligence, which would kill the deal. They didn't know, they hadn't read the fine print, they were too busy disrupting to read the contracts I wrote. A slow, cold smile spread inside my chest. It didn't reach my face. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay," Robert blinked. "I accept my termination. I'll pack my things." "What about the NDA?" Nate demanded, holding out a pen. "I'll think about it," I said. "But right now, I'm just going to leave." "You walk out, you get nothing?" Nate yelled as I turned my back. "We'll see," I whispered to the glass door. I went to my desk. I didn't pack everything. Just my framed degree, my favorite plant, and most importantly, my hard drive containing the encrypted backups of every email Nate had ever sent. Security escorted me out 10 minutes later. As the heavy glass doors hissed shut behind me, the cold Massachusetts air hit my face. It felt clean. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call my husband. I opened my calendar and set a reminder for Wednesday, October 19th. The day the money is supposed to move. I got in my car, turned on the heated seats, and drove home in silence. They wanted me to be invisible? Fine. I'd vanish. And I'd take their $50 million with me. For the first time in 15 years. Didn't set an alarm on Monday morning. I woke up naturally at 7 o'clock a.m., the pale autumn light filtering through the blinds of my home office in Brookline. My house was silent, ordered and sane. Everything Nebula Tech was not. I made a pot of French press coffee, not the sludge from the office Keurig, and sat down at my personal laptop. I didn't log into Slack. I didn't check my work email, which was already deactivated, I assumed. I went ghost. To the world, Aaron the Seco no longer existed. But Aaron the strategist was just clocking in. I pulled up the saved PDF of the Series C term sheet final draft V4. PDF. I scrolled past the valuation tables, past the equity splits, down to the boring, dense paragraphs at the end that visionaries like Robert skimmed over. There it was. Clause 14B. Company warrants that the position of Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, CICO, shall be held by Aaron S. continuously through the closing date. The closing shall be contingent upon the receipt of a compliance certificate signed by the SECO attesting to no material breaches of the company's anti-corruption policy. Any change in the SECO personnel within 30 days prior to closing must be approved in writing by the lead investor Archer Capital. I took a sip of coffee. Tasted like victory. They hadn't just fired an employee, they had fired the ignition key to their engine. I spent the day gardening. I ripped out dead weeds with a vicious efficiency. Every time I yanked a root, I pictured Nate's smug face. By noon, my garden bed was pristine. Inside, my phone started buzzing. First, it was generic calls from the office. Probably HR trying to get my parking pass back. I let them go to voicemail. Then, texts from colleagues. Aaron, are you okay? Nate is walking around like he owns the place. They're saying you quit? WTF? I didn't reply. Silence is a weapon. If you don't feed the fire, they panic. By Tuesday, the narrative shifted. I checked LinkedIn from an anonymous burner account. Nate had posted a photo of himself in my old office. My plant was gone, replaced by a neon sign that said hustle. His caption, sometimes you have to trim the fat to let the muscle grow. Big things coming this week. Series C new era leadership. He had also announced a new partnership. Excited to onboard Vandalay Strategic Solutions as our new compliance partners. Agile, fast, no blockers, Vandalay Strategic Solutions. The name sounded familiar, not from a Seinfeld episode, but from that audit I was running before I got axed. I dug into my backup drive, the one I'd wisely taken with me. I pulled up the vendor list. Vandalay wasn't a compliance firm. It was a shell company registered in Delaware 3 weeks ago. The registered agent? A guy named Chadwick. I did a quick cross-reference on Facebook. Chadwick was Nate's fraternity brother. There were photos of them doing keg stands together in 2018. So, Nate fired me to replace me with his drinking buddy, likely to funnel consulting fees out of the Series C cash before the investors noticed. It was embezzlement 101, done with the sophistication of a toddler stealing a cookie while staring at the camera. Wednesday morning came, 2 days until closing. The calls stopped being from HR and started coming from legal. Nebula Tech's general counsel, a spineless man named Greg who wore boadies to distract from his incompetence, called me 4 times in an hour. Aaron, it's Greg, pick up. We have a paperwork issue. Aaron, please. You need to clarify your status. My status? My status was unemployed and gardening. I watched the clock. The Archer Capital legal team would be doing their final document sweep right about now. They'd be looking for the compliance certificate. They'd ask Greg for it. Greg would look at Nate. Nate would point to Chadwick. And Archer Capital would look at the term sheet, see my name, and ask the question that would bring the whole house of cards down. Where is Aaron? I poured a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. The sun was setting, the trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the snap. Thursday morning, the day before the closing, my phone was now vibrating so constantly it was moving across the kitchen counter on its own. It wasn't just Greg anymore, it was Robert. Aaron, let's talk. Maybe we were hasty. Aaron, this is serious. You're jeopardizing the company. I laughed out loud at that one. I was jeopardizing the company. That's like blaming the iceberg for being in the way of the Titanic after the captain steered right into it. Around 10 o'clock a.m., I got an email on my personal encrypted Proton Mail account. It was from Kevin Cruncher, which I instantly knew was Kevin, a junior analyst in finance. Kevin was a sweet kid, good with Excel, terrified of Nate. He was one of the few people who actually read the ethics newsletters I sent out. Subject, the building is on fire. Hi Aaron, I don't know if you're reading this, but it's bad. The investors sent over the final checklist this morning. They flagged the compliance cert. Nate told them you were on medical leave and that Chad, the new guy, would sign. Archer Capital said no. They quoted Clause 14B. They said if you don't sign, they don't wire the money tomorrow. Robert is screaming in his office. Nate is trying to Photoshop your signature onto an old document. I'm not joking. I saw him trying to use MS Paint. Also, I found this in the outgoing wire queue. Nate approved a $50K retainer to Vandalay yesterday. I attached the PDF. Please don't tell them I emailed you. Attached was a blurry screenshot of a wire transfer request. $50,000 to Chadwick's firm. Nate wasn't just incompetent. He was actively committing fraud while the investors were watching. He was trying to forge my signature. That crossed the line from civil suit to federal indictment. I picked up my phone, not to call Robert, not to call Greg. I called the number on the business card I had kept in my Rolodex for 3 months. Archer Capital, Legal Department, a crisp voice answered. This is Aaron S., I said, my voice steady as steel. I believe your general counsel, Marcus Thorne, is looking for me. There was a pause, then a flurry of typing. Hold for Mr. Thorne immediately. Marcus came on the line 10 seconds later. Aaron, we've been told you're in the hospital with a severe case of exhaustion. I was about to send flowers. I'm currently gardening, Marcus, and the only thing exhausted is my patience for fraud. Interesting, Marcus said. His tone shifted from polite to predatory. Our term sheet requires your signature. Nebula Tech is claiming you're unavailable but technically still employed. I was terminated last Friday for cause. No severance, I have the termination letter. Terminated? Marcus sounded like he just tasted bad milk. That's a material breach of the pre-closing conditions. And who is this Chadwick? That, I said, is a longer story. Meet me at the Tap Bakery in Harvard Square in an hour. Bring a notary. I'm leaving now, Marcus said. I hung up. I went upstairs and changed. The gardening clothes came off. I put on my board meeting suit, charcoal gray, sharp lapels, killer heels. I grabbed the binder containing the termination letter, the printouts of Nate's harassment, and the fresh screenshot Kevin had sent me of the wire transfer. I wasn't going to the bakery to negotiate. I was going to hand Marcus the murder weapon and let him decide if he wanted to shoot the deal in the head. As I drove into Cambridge, I felt a strange calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about professional hygiene. I was scrubbing a stain out of the industry. I walked into the bakery. Marcus was there, looking impatient. He saw me, saw the binder, and stood up. Aaron, he said. Marcus, I replied, sliding into the booth. I hope you're hungry, because I'm about to serve you a very expensive problem. I opened the binder. The first page was the screenshot of Nate trying to wire $50K to his frat brother. Let's start with the embezzlement, I said, and then we can discuss my medical leave. Marcus put on his reading glasses. His face went pale. The shift had happened. The power wasn't in the boardroom anymore. It was at a small marble table, smelling of coffee and impending litigation. By 2 p.m. Thursday, the atmosphere inside Nebula Tech must have resembled a submarine taking on water. I wasn't there, but I could feel the pressure change in the air. I was back home, sipping herbal tea, and the nuclear email chain started. Marcus had clearly returned to his office and fired a warning shot across Robert's bow. My personal phone rang. It was Robert. I let it ring. It rang again. Robert, then Greg, the general counsel, then Robert again. Finally, a voicemail appeared. I played it on speaker. Aaron, it's Robert. Look, there's been a massive misunderstanding. Nate was overzealous. We never processed the termination paperwork. You're still an employee. I need you to hop on a Zoom with Archer Capital at 4 p.m. Just to smooth things over. Call me back immediately. We never processed the paperwork. The lie was so lazy it was insulting. I had the signed letter in my hand. I didn't call back. At 3:30 p.m., Kevin texted me again. Dude, Robert is sweating through his shirt. He just yelled at HR to unfire you in the system. They're trying to reactivate your email. Nate is hiding in the server room. I logged into my Proton Mail. Marcus had CC'd me on a formal notice sent to Nebula Text Board. To Robert Roberts, CEO from Archer Capital Legal Subject. Material breach/suspension of funding. Mr. Roberts, it has come to our attention that the representations made regarding the employment status of the Chief Ethics Officer were false. Furthermore, we have received credible documentation regarding unauthorized vendor payments to entities associated with executive leadership. The Series C funding is hereby suspended indefinitely pending a full compliance audit. Unless Mrs. Aaron S. is personally present at the closing table tomorrow at 9 a.m. with full authority to sign the compliance certificate, we will be withdrawing our offer and alerting the SEC regarding the disclosure irregularities, governing yourself accordingly. Boom, they didn't just want me back, they wanted me present with full authority. Marcus had played his part perfectly. He didn't want the deal to die, they wanted the tech, but he wasn't going to give $50 million to a frat house fraudster. He was using me as the battering ram to force governance. At 4:15 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera. It was Greg, the general counsel. Looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was holding a bouquet of flowers, cheap Bodga flowers. I opened the door, leaving the chain on. Aaron, Greg pleaded, peering through the crack. Please, you have to answer the phone. I'm not an employee, Greg. You fired me. It was a mistake. Robert didn't mean it. Nate went rogue. We're rescinding the termination. We'll give you a raise, we need you to sign the cert. I can't sign a certificate of ethical compliance, Greg. I said, my voice dripping with faux concern, because the company isn't compliant. Nate tried to embezzle 50 grand yesterday. If I sign that, I'm committing perjury. Greg's face crumbled. We'll fix it. We'll cancel the wire. We'll do whatever you want. Whatever I want, I asked. Yes, anything, name your price. Just come to the closing. I looked at him. This was the moment I could ask for bonus. I could ask for corner office. I want Nate gone, I said. Greg blinked. What? I want Nate terminated, for cause, publicly, and I want full autonomy over the compliance budget, and a clawback of all his unvested equity. Aaron, Robert will never fire his son. Then Robert will never get his $50 million, I said, and you can tell him that when the SEC knocks on the door, I'll be the one opening it. I closed the door in his face. The trap was tight. The only way out was for Robert to sacrifice his golden boy. It was biblical. It was tragic. It was absolutely necessary. I went back to the kitchen. I had one more thing to prepare. I opened my laptop and drafted a new document, Conditions of Return PDF. I wasn't just going back to work. I was going back to rule. Thursday night was a long, dark vigil. The city of Boston slept, but I knew the lights on the 14th floor of the Nebula Tech building were blazing. My terms had been delivered via Greg. I could imagine the screaming match happening in the glass fishbowl. Robert, torn between his ego, his son, and his greed. Nate, realizing that his vibes and hustle couldn't save him from a federal fraud statute. At 11:45 p.m., my phone lit up. Incoming call, Nate Roberts. I stared at it, the audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity is a powerful drug. I wanted to hear the fear. I swiped green but didn't speak. Aaron, his voice was cracked, high-pitched. The swagger was gone. He sounded like a child who had broken a vase. Aaron, are you there? I'm listening, I said. Look, I'm sorry, okay, about the LinkedIn thing. It was a joke. I didn't mean to offend you. I'm not offended, Nate. I'm legally obligated to report you. Don't do this, he begged. My dad? He's going to kill me. He said if the deal falls through, he's cutting me off. I have payments, Aaron. I have a lease on the Tesla. You can't ruin my life over a misunderstanding. You ruined your own life when you tried to wire investor money to a shell company, I said coldly. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was theft. I can pay it back. We canceled the wire. Just sign the paper, please. We can work this out. I'll stay out of your way. I promise. It's too late for promises, Nate. You're a liability. An ethics officer identifies liabilities and removes them. You BTCH, he snapped, the fear turning instantly back to rage. You think you can dictate terms? My dad built this company. You're just I hung up. He hadn't changed. He was just scared. There is a difference between remorse and fear of consequences. Nate only felt the latter. 10 minutes later, a text from Robert. We accept. Be here at 8:30 a.m. 2 words, we accept. I didn't feel joy. I felt a heavy, cold satisfaction. Like setting a broken bone. It hurts, but it's the only way to heal. I spent the rest of the night prepping. I printed 3 copies of the revised compliance certificate. I printed the termination agreement for Nathan Roberts. I printed a board resolution granting the SECO veto power over vendor contracts. I ironed my white shirt until it was crisp enough to cut glass. I polished my shoes. This wasn't a meeting, it was a coronation. I slept for 4 hours. When I woke up on Friday, the sky was gray and spitting snow, early for October, but fitting. I drank my coffee black. I checked the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the tired, harried compliance officer who blocked creeps on LinkedIn. She was a reaper in a blazer. I grabbed my briefcase. I grabbed my coat. I drove to the office. The security guard, old Mr. Henderson, looked surprised to see me. ID card isn't working, Miss Aaron, he said apologetically. Try it now, I said. He swiped it. The light turned green. Greg had reactivated me at 3:00 a.m. Welcome back, Henderson said, confused. Thanks, Hendo, I said. Keep the gate open. There's going to be an escort leaving shortly. I stepped into the elevator. I pressed 14. As the numbers climbed, I took a deep breath. Ding. The doors opened. The office was silent. Everyone was huddled in the kitchen, whispering. They looked up as I walked down the main corridor. The click-clack of my heels was the only sound in the room. I didn't look left or right. I walked straight to the boardroom. The glass walls were frosted now, the privacy mode engaged. I pushed the door open. Robert was there. Greg was there. The team from Archer Capital, Marcus and 3 suits were there, and Nate's chair, it was empty. The air in the boardroom smelled of stale coffee and fierce sweat. Robert looked 10 years older than he had last week. His eyes were sunken. His tie loosened. Greg was staring at the table like it was the most interesting mahogany he'd ever seen. Marcus, the Archer Capital lawyer, looked up. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't friendly. Lawyers aren't friendly, but it was respectful. Game recognizing game. Miss S., Marcus said. We were concerned you wouldn't make it. Traffic was light, I said, placing my briefcase on the table. I didn't sit down. I stood at the head of the table, opposite Robert. Aaron, Robert croaked. Glad you're feeling better. I feel fantastic, Robert, I said. Now, before we proceed with the Series C closing documents, we have some internal housekeeping to finalize. I opened my briefcase and slid a document toward Robert. What is this? Robert asked, though he knew. That is the separation agreement for Nate, I said, effective immediately. For cause: gross misconduct and attempted embezzlement. 0 severance. And a press release stating he is stepping down to pursue personal interests. Robert's hand shook as he picked up the pen. Aaron, he's my son, and this is a business, I said. You can be a father on the weekends. Right now, you're a CEO asking for $50 million. You can't have both. Marcus leaned forward. Archer Capital supports this motion. We cannot invest in a firm with nepotistic irregularities. Robert looked at the investors, then at me. He realized he was cornered. If he refused, the money walked, the company crashed, and he lost everything. He signed. He pressed the pen so hard into the paper it almost tore. Done, he whispered. One more thing, I said. I slid the second document across. Board Resolution 402. It grants the Office of Ethics and Compliance independent authority to veto any vendor contract over $5,000 without CEO approval. It makes my position fireable only by a unanimous vote of the Board of Directors, not the CEO. Robert's head snapped up. You're neutering me. I'm insulating you, I corrected. I'm making sure you don't accidentally approve another shell company and go to jail. I'm doing you a favor. Sign it, Robert, Marcus said, checking his watch. We have a wire cutoff at 11:00 a.m. Robert signed. He looked defeated, small. The visionary was gone. It was just a man who had been outmaneuvered by the woman he tried to bully. Excellent, I said. I sat down. I pulled the Archer Capital binder toward me. I flipped to Clause 14b, Certificate of Good Standing and Ethical Compliance. I took out my own pen, a Mont Blanc I bought myself when I got certified. I read the text. It's certified that the company was clean. With Nate gone and the new controls in place, it finally was. I signed my name, Aaron S., Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. Thank you, Aaron, Marcus said, taking the binder. We'll initiate the wire. Robert stood up and walked out of the room without a word. Greg followed him like a lost puppy. I stayed seated for a moment. I watched the snow falling outside the window. I had won, but it wasn't a fist-pumping victory. It was the quiet satisfaction of a column in a spreadsheet finally balancing out to zero. I gathered my papers. I walked out of the boardroom. As I passed the reception desk, I saw security escorting someone out the front door. He was carrying a box. He was wearing a Lululemon hoodie and looking furious. Nate, he saw me. He stopped. He opened his mouth to scream something, probably some last-ditch insult about my vibes. I just pointed to the door. Mr. Henderson. The guard gently nudged him forward. Let's go, son. Nate vanished into the revolving door. I took a deep breath. The office air, usually recycled and stale, felt breathable for the first time in years. The wire hit the account at 11:05 a.m., $50 million. Usually when funding closes, there's champagne. There are high fives. Someone plays All I Do Is Win on a Bluetooth speaker. This time, the office was library quiet. Robert had locked himself in his office with the blinds drawn. The hustle neon sign in Nate's old office had been unplugged. I went back to my desk. My plant was gone. Nate had probably thrown it out, but my chair was there. I sat down and logged in. First email, HR notification, Nathan Roberts terminated. Second email, compliance authority update all staff. I saw Kevin, the analyst, peeking over his cubicle wall. He looked terrified and awestruck. I waved him over. Is it true? He whispered, standing at the entrance of my cubicle like I was a mafia don. Is Nate really gone? He's gone, Kevin, I said, and the Vandalay payments canceled. I flagged them as fraudulent like you said. Good, you're getting a promotion. I need a director of internal audit. You start Monday. Kevin's jaw dropped. Really? Yes, we have a lot of work to do. Nate was lazy, but he was prolific. I want to audit every expense report from the last 18 months. If anyone bought so much as a pack of gum that wasn't business-related, I want to know. On it, Kevin said, straightening up. He looked like a soldier who finally found a general worth following. At 3:00 p.m., Robert finally emerged. He walked to my desk. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked haunted. You played a hard game, Aaron, he said quietly. I didn't play a game, Robert. I did my job. You were playing a game. I just enforced the rules. He's in a bad place. He's calling me nonstop. He's an adult, I said, not looking up from my screen. He'll figure it out, or he won't. That's not a company problem. You have a lot of power now, Robert said, eyeing the board resolution on my desk. Don't think I won't be watching you. I count on it, I said, meeting his gaze. That's how compliance works. Everyone watches everyone. That's how we stay safe. He lingered for a moment, looking for a weakness, a crack in the armor. He found none. He walked away. I spent the rest of the afternoon dismantling Nate's legacy. I canceled the subscriptions to the energy drink supply. I revoked the corporate Uber accounts for 5 of his consultants. I rewrote the social media policy to explicitly forbid unwanted connection requests. It wasn't glamorous work, it was janitorial. Someone had to sweep up the broken glass. By 6:00 p.m., the office was empty. The bros were gone, probably at a bar complaining about how the vibe had shifted. The workers, the engineers, the support staff had left quietly, looking relieved. I was the last one there. I walked into Nate's old office. It was empty now, stripped of his personality. I plugged the hustle sign back in just to see it light up. It flickered pink. It looked tacky. I pulled the plug out of the wall. I picked up the sign and dropped it into the recycling bin. Ethics, I said to the empty room, that's the new hustle. I walked out of the building at 6:30 p.m. The snow had stopped, but the ground was dusted white. The air was biting cold, the kind that wakes you up. My phone buzzed. I checked it. It wasn't Nate. It wasn't Robert. It was a notification from LinkedIn. New connection request, Marcus Thorne, General Counsel at Archer Capital. The message read, impressive work today. If you ever get tired of babysitting, give us a call. We need people who know how to use a sword. I smiled. I accepted the connection. I walked to my car. As I unlocked the door, I looked back at the Nebula Tech building. The lights were on. The money was in the bank. The people inside would get their paychecks. The product would ship. Most of them would never know how close they came to the cliff. They wouldn't know that their jobs were saved because a middle-aged woman refused to be bullied by a fail son in loafers. And that was fine. I didn't need their applause. I needed their compliance. I got into my car. I checked my blocked list one last time. Nate Roberts, still there, still blocked. I thought about the prompt that started this whole mess. You got that strict librarian vibe? He was right about one thing. I am strict, and like a librarian. I just charged him the ultimate late fee. I started the engine. I put on some classic rock, Tom Petty, I won't back down. A cliché? Maybe, but I earned it. I drove home to my quiet house, my weed-free garden, and my husband who knows better than to ask me to connect on LinkedIn. So to anyone out there dealing with a toxic boss, a nepotism hire, or a partner who thinks they can gaslight you into submission, document everything. Read the fine print. And never, ever sign the NDA until you've burned their house down with it. Aaron, Seco, signing off.